Hello everyone. So I'm doing something that I don't think I've ever felt the need to do before. I'm making a film specifically to introduce you to a couple of films which are coming up, and they're about cults. Now, this very personal material, very difficult for me to make, and had quite a challenging time for some days afterwards. So what I want you to understand is that it's challenging material. I feel it's a very important message, which is why I made the film. So because I felt it was such an important issue and I had my own misgivings about doing this, we did a tarot reading first of all, and I got the 5 of discs as the advice, which was worry. I was clearly worried about what I was going to be saying. And then the outcome was the Princess of Discs, which is a creative, youthful, good connection to the ground, and I thought that's brilliant. And I thought, well, let's just look at the other side. So the advice about not doing it was interference, the 8 of Swords, and the outcome of not doing it was the 9 of Swords, cruelty. So there was no question I was going to make the film. But I just wanted to explain to you that it's not been straightforward to make, and I will now conclude, and over to you to watch these 2 films, see what you think of them, and to be aware that what I'm going to ask you to do is, I'm talking about a subject, I'm inviting you to take it further, see how this extends into the bigger picture, society, culture. Let it be something that provokes thoughts in you. Thank you. Ruslana Korshanova. Right, that was a really difficult thing, I've done it. So Ruslana Korshanova, Russian model, steps off a building and plunges to a death. Why? So that's what I'm going to look at with you today, and it's going to take us on a strange journey, and it's going to get very personal. It's a film I've not wanted to make for a long time, and because I went filming with Dan last week and he had a breakthrough on camera, it's my turn to have mine. So I'm here to talk to you about cults. A cult. What is a cult? And what do cults do? And why is it relevant to talk about this? So here's the thing, she's a Russian model and she's in her 20s, and she climbs out of her own building and she manages to jump from her building to a brand new building which is under construction right nearby. No one quite knows how she managed to get across the scaffolding, but she did, and she walked through this building under construction, went out to the other side of it, and she did a really fast run and she leapt off the building 8.5 meters, and then she plummeted to a death. And the book I'm reading, which is where this comes from, here I am on my 40 days of silence, and it's called, and there's a photograph for you, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, Adventures in Modern Russia. So I think you know me well enough to know by now that I have this extraordinary guidance that goes on in terms of the information that comes to me, films, TV shows, and especially books. So I've been plying my way through this book and discovering what modern Russia is like, and it's very disturbing. And last night I'm reading about this model who plunged to a death, and the guy who wrote the book wants to find out why. He's an investigative journalist, and eventually the roads lead to an organisation, and it's all pieced together, and basically Ruslana, amongst other vulnerable young women particularly, joined this organisation and got exposed to things that most of you won't have any idea about. And I was completely empathising and reading, and then there came a moment late last night when it was like one of those moments you get in your life where it's like, oh yes, this is all so familiar. So I'm going to talk to you about my 3 cult experiences. I'll say virtually nothing about the first because I know virtually nothing about it, and I'll say rather more about the others, because cults are part of human life. They exist all over the world pretty much, and it leads into something much bigger. So a cult is a group, very tightly organised, and they offer people something, and not always, but sometimes they charge money for their services. And in fact, they can be known to charge huge amounts of money. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with something which is called Scientology. That's all I'm going to say about that. So this is here to focus on what happened to her and what happened to other people and what happened to me. It's all connected, all related. And then we're going to go to the really big questions of why. Why is this all going on? How is it that they're able to do what they do? And what is the circumstance which makes this even possible? So we're looking at modern society. So I spent a good time looking at Russian society in recent times, and that was a big shock to realize that actually what's going on there is anything goes. It was communism, then it was perestroika, which was the preparation for the collapse of the USSR as we knew it. And what then happened is the country got taken over by mafia gangs and oligarchs. And that's about the last thing I knew until I started reading this book, and this book has brought me up to speed with all the things that's been going on since then. And suffice it to say that the country is in a degree of chaos which is very difficult for anyone living in the UK to even conceive of, because everything here is ordered and relatively safe. However, what happened to me in this country. So even though it's relatively safe, actually that's not true at all. So I'm going to go into that too. She's a young woman, a young girl, 15, and she gets spotted by a modelling agency. She's been living her life out in one of these really quiet Soviet republics. She's actually a hard-working student, determined to go to university. Her big selling point in her life is not her looks, it's her intelligence. She's an intelligent young woman and she's determined to go to university, and her mother's supporting her through that. But then when someone sees her on a little photograph in an in-flight magazine that was taken through sheer chance because of her knowing someone, that photograph is enough for the talent scout to see that this woman could become an amazing model. And so she gets wooed, she gets persuaded, she gets seduced into a modelling career. Her mother's reluctant, she's reluctant, but eventually she goes along with it and she enters the world of modelling, which is, if you don't know, a very dehumanising process, because the first thing you learn as a model is this: you are nothing, the only thing that matters is your image. That's all anyone's interested in, and they're not interested in anything that comes out of your mouth. Now this creates, as you can imagine, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old girl. She's going through adolescence, she's having a lot of feelings, lots of thoughts. The last thing she wants to do is to be told that she's just an image and she can just shut up and pose. But that's actually the life of a model. So of course there's this incredible pressure builds up because she's going through all these changes and there's no one to speak to because she's on the road being photographed over and over and over again by a lot of leering men mostly. Yeah, the more I speak about modelling, the more unattractive it sounds to me, but it's a very popular career the world over. That's quite something in its own right. But you need to understand that, so you've got some picture of what's going on for her. So she's like a pressure cooker with all these feelings and thoughts and no outlet because she's on the road. No one to trust, no one to talk to, no one to share with. And eventually she hears about an organisation, and what they're offering is the ability to go through a transformational process which will enable her to fully awaken to her true potential, to earn lots of money, and to live the life that she wants to live, not being beholden to anyone. Now, bearing in mind that as a model her life is under contract, she's constantly controlled, this is incredibly attractive. Of course it would be, wouldn't it? And so she does go along to the first session, and all the people are waiting outside a room. They've done a little registration process and they're waiting for the doors to be opened. Very loud music gets played, very abruptly, very shockingly. the doors are opened, and the people are told it's time to go in, time to go in. And when they go into this building, into this room, it's almost completely pitch black, and there are people shouting, and they're shouting loud, and they're saying, come on, get your seat, hurry up, find somewhere to sit, put your bags down, don't fuss, we're starting now. So it begins. So it's harassment, it's intimidation, it's disturbing, and it's upsetting. And they rush to find their spaces, and they're sitting in this fan shape, and there's obviously a central place where someone's going to come in, and at the back they can't see, there's a load of seats, and all the seats and all the shouting people are what we call volunteers for the organisation. They've done the training, and their turn now is to support the organisation by doing anything that supports the work of the organisation. At the moment it's to be sitting on seats shouting and intimidating these people who've never seen each other and never been in this room before. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail from here, but I'm just going to quickly intercut to the third cult I went to. The third cult I went to, it's actually got a name, and it's called Landmark Education. And I'm going to be really straight with you, because I learned a huge amount from that organisation, and at the same time as learning a huge amount, it was also emphatically and definitively a cult, and they use a lot of the methods that cults use. So I've experienced being rushed into a room, and I've experienced what she experienced, Ruslana, because when the person comes in, there's a big spotlight, they walk in, and all the volunteers are clapping behind, they're hyping everybody up, and then this person starts speaking very rapidly indeed. And what happens over the next 2 hours is that many psychological processes are used to render all the people in the room who are the subjects in a state of confusion, anxiety and fear. What they are doing is they're creating something which Timothy Leary talked about in his books. If you don't know about Timothy Leary, the psychedelic experience, he's the guy that took awareness of LSD to the world. An amazing man, really well worth researching him for so many reasons, but I'm only going to focus in one thing that he talks about. What Timothy Leary helps us understand is that the bullying, the pressure, the disturbance, the darkness, all these things that were throwing all these young girls and young men off balance was designed to create a state of what we call imprint vulnerability. Now I'm going to cut to something completely different. We're in Greece in the 60s and early 70s, and at that time the country was ruled by something called a junta. A junta is a military government. So in other words, soldiers, high-level soldiers, are the government. They control everything that goes on in Greece. You look up history, this is actually what happened. Now this government ruled, as all military governments do, by fear. Same thing in Chile, same thing in all the different countries you can think about when they've had military dictatorships. Countries ruled by fear. So what they did is they got hold of young men in their late teens and very early 20s, but they really wanted late teens, and they got young men from the countryside who lived on the farms and were uneducated and didn't have any chance of getting a proper career, no chance of going to college, anything like that, and they selected these lads very carefully. And what they did is they took them to what you would call in today's terms a boot camp. And it was rather like a strict training that you get to go join the army or some military career, or something more extreme like the Marines perhaps, where they put on the pressure even more so. And what they do with these young lads is they subject them to intimidation, they bully them, they make their lives a living hell, and they create a whole bunch of rules, and if there's anything they do that's wrong, they subject them to more humiliation. They do things like get them to clean a toilet with a toothbrush, the toothbrush which they're going to use to clean their teeth that night. That kind of thing. Really nasty stuff. Now they can cross the line because it's a military dictatorship. These people aren't paying, they've been rounded up out of the countryside. But it doesn't matter, the same thing's happening. They're subjected to a degree of brutality and confusion which leaves them open to what Timothy Leary calls imprint vulnerability. When I went and did my work with Landmark Education, paying my money, I experienced imprint vulnerability. When Ruslana was having this experience with this cult, she reached a point of imprint vulnerability. She was completely confused, didn't have any idea what was going on. And there was a lot of humiliation. That's another very key factor I've got to mention in terms of cult. I watched people being humiliated when I was doing my training with Landmark Education. I watched this young woman go up on the stage and say that she's an actress, and I had the man who was the forum leader get her into tears within 10 minutes and say, "So you told us you're a actress? Actually, you're not an actress, are you? You're a waitress." And he took her through the whole process. You could see that. Very gentle compared with what went on in Greece and compared with what went on in Ruslana's training. Humiliation. One of the people in the room simply wants to go to the toilet. Like any human being, she gets up and starts to head towards the exit. The volunteers start to attack her with words, and they start to use humiliation, and they start to guilt trip her into the fact that she's paid this money and she's holding up all these people, and all these people want her to shut up, sit down and stop interrupting their training, which they're all paid for, which is valuable. Can you imagine the kind of psychological pressures that this is building in the person concerned? And they can't have any solidarity with each other because they can't speak to each other because they're being talked at the whole time. This relates to another cult experience which I'm going to speak about, which I went through too. I'm actually going to name it. I'm going to name it. I've never done this in my life. It's called college, a long time ago. Just wanted to get that out there. So imprint vulnerability is when you've experienced humiliation, fear, confusion, anxiety, upset, and you don't know what's up and what's down and what's right and what's wrong anymore. Now, when a person reaches this point of imprint vulnerability, so you go back to the Greece, the young lads who are training in this military camp, they don't know what they're training for yet, and I haven't told you, have I? No, that's cool. Please, I didn't tell you. So they're having this really harsh boot camp, and it goes on for weeks, goes on for a long time. And one of the main features in all these things I'm talking about, sleep deprivation. Ruslana experienced sleep deprivation. When I was training with Landmark, we started early in the morning, we didn't finish until 10:30 or 11 p.m. And then we'd have to travel through public transport to our hotel and have something to eat and collapse into bed, and have to get up too early and be up the following morning public transport to get back in time, because of one thing, you know, with all these cults, you will not be late. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to read out to you the rules that Ruslana and her fellow people were given on the very first session of the first day of her cult experience. So all day at the cult, stayed up late, then they were sent home. But before they were sent home, this is what they were told. I will not tell anyone what goes on here. I will not make any recordings by any means. I will not be late. I will not drink alcohol for the duration of the training. I think the most important one was the first one. I will not tell anyone what goes on here. That's key if you want to create a fertile state, which is what we're leading up to with this imprint vulnerability. Right, I'm going to talk about the second cult that I was involved with. This one I was involved with when I was 27. Now, when I was 10 years old, I experienced a particularly vicious form of cult abuse, which involves satanic abuse, sex, and a whole bunch of other things. That's the one, we're just going to leave that to one side because I was 10, so I don't remember anything about it. But when I was 27, I was with my partner. My partner was pregnant. We were married, and we were exploring alternative communities because we're interested in living in the community. I was. My partner was less keen, but I really was. And so we went to the second of these two communities, and what happened to us is we were welcomed and we were given food, and within a very short space of time what happened is that someone was talking to me and someone else was talking to my wife, and it went on and it went on and it went on, and all evening someone was talking to me, and they spoke quickly, and I never had a chance to say anything to Cindy because they was talking, and engaging me and engaging me and engaging me. They were using basic manipulation techniques, the same as what was being used in this military academy in Greece, but much more gently, and basically the same as what Ruslana is being exposed to in her cult experience and the one that I went to as well. All the same thing. So it's all leading up to this point when the person basically drops out of their normal state of being. All the normal states that we have which protect us, which gives us the ability to say no, basically get eroded over a period of time, until suddenly the person is so confused they're lost. Now this is the key word I want to give you. When you are lost, you are vulnerable to new inputs, a new program. So let's take us to the Greeks, the military encampment, military barracks, where they're having all these horrific things. Up at 3 in the morning, 20-mile run, full kit, whatever. All these things have been exposed to it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're just hanging in there. They're exhausted, they're terrified, they don't know what up is, they don't know what down is anymore, and all of a sudden they wake up really early, and they're all told to at the double, and they get out of that building and they're told to go somewhere, and they go down the corridor. They've never been down this corridor before, and they go into a completely different space. Where they've been has been horrific, like out of some horror film, really revolting, and suddenly they're in this palace, it's paradise, and they're given showers, and then they're given baths, and they're given time to be in the baths, and they come out of the baths and they get given really brand new uniforms. They look smart. These are uniforms that makes them look really good, and they're putting these uniforms on and smiling at each other. What's happening? What's going on? And then the commandant comes in and explains to them. All we were doing was testing you to make sure that you were patriotic. We just wanted to be sure that we could trust you. Now, we know you're all patriots because you've been through everything. You love your country. We know that. You've proved yourselves. Now there are some people, and we're going to take you to them. Now these people are terrorists. These people are the scum of the earth. These people do the most terrible things. They abduct children. They subject them to the most horrific things. They split families up. They kill people without warning. We've got to put a stop to this sort of thing, but we want to really find out who's organising this, what's really going on. So what we would like you to do is, would you just go in there and soften them up a bit? We just want you to soften them up a bit. So there are some batons over there, and we'll just leave you to it. That's right, this is a training ground for torturers, and that's only the beginning. And once they've learned how to do that, they can do anything. And it's not long before they're attaching the electrodes and subjecting people to unspeakable atrocities. That's how you train a torturer. You can train a torturer the same way as Ruslana was being trained in the cult that she was in. It's all the same thing. So the key point is, when you reach the imprint vulnerability, you are so lost that you don't know what's going on anymore. And this is the punchline, this is the one you've been waiting for. You are now blindly obedient, and you will do anything they tell you. That's what happened to me when I was a child. I went through an experience and I reached a point of blind obedience, and I would do anything they told me. And I remember virtually nothing of it. So fast forward to when I was 27, and I'm visiting this community with my pregnant wife, and they've been talking at us all night, and the food that we're being offered is quite strange. It's interesting to note that there's no salt and no animal food. It's vegan food, and there's this stuff called cheese which is made from soya flour and oil, and it's pretty weird, but everyone just acts like it's all normal. We just ate what we were given, it's all fine. But there's this way that they've been at us, they've been using all these same techniques, and there reaches a point when it's time to go to bed. And we do go to bed, and in the night I have this dream which I'll never forget, and in this dream I'm surrounded by a circle of greenish yellow eyes, and there's a chant going on. The chant is, "We are one, we are one, we are one." Now, my imprint vulnerability moment actually happened during my sleep, and I woke up the following morning and I was a zombie. And the people were quick to meet us as soon as we got up out of bed, and hello, and come and have some breakfast and all the rest of it. And I had some breakfast, and Cinder went, they were talking to Cinder, they were talking to me, keeping us separate again. And I have some breakfast, so would you like to come along? And the next thing I know, I'm walking along this corridor. 10 minutes later, I've got this scraper and I've got this sandpaper, and I'm now a worker in this community. I'm just cleaning the paintwork of this door. I am blindly obedient. I have no idea what's going on, and I don't even know, I've got no idea what's going on. So here's the thing, whatever was done to me as a child sowed the seeds, and that meant that I was easy game, very easy pickings for anyone later on. So by the time I was in my mid to late 20s and I walked through the doors of this place, they took one look at us and they realised I was exactly what they wanted. And she was no use to them whatsoever, so they needed to get her out, and they needed to recruit me. And all they did was have conversations, feed me strange food, keep me separate from my partner, hammer away with their words, and do what was obviously black magic, which was done during the time that we were asleep. And it was probably more like a vision than a dream, but that's how they did it. But going back to Ruslana and her experience, the imprint vulnerability was done, and basically what happened is more humiliation and more disturbing things, and it takes them to the point where they're given a job to do, and it's a really simple job. All they got to do, and it's perfect, this one, it's really well designed, all they've got to do when they leave the place at the end of the day, on their way home, they just got to hug 10 people. Now that is so cool, isn't it? Because hugging people is really cool. That's not going to upset anyone. And so she does, as she's told, she hugs 10 people, and she notices most people are pretty surprised and freaked out, and no one's anything horrible, it's all good. And then she goes back for day 2 and day 3 and all the rest of it. And when that program's finished, then the obvious thing happens, and it happened to me at the end of the program I was doing with Landmark. At the end of my program, I find myself being subjected to the hard sell, and the hard sell was really simple. And this is exactly the same with Ruslana. What they did is they opened her up to see that what she needed to do was to do part 2 of the training, and that would actually give her all the skills she needed to be the successful person that she wants to be. And all they've been doing is they've just been breaking her down and beating everyone down so they could see that basically they're all a bunch of victims, they're all selfish, and they're all hopeless, and they need the help of the organisation. So perfectly well done. So when the volunteers come out with the documents to sign the contracts for the next bit of the training, of course what happens is most people, they just sign up straight away. So the first time this happened for me, I just signed up straight away, and I went and did the next program. But you must remember, when I was doing that particular thing, that was my 3rd cult. My first one I was 10, my second was my 27, and my third one I was in my 40s. A lot more experience of life by this point. And I threw myself, and I did the 2nd training, and at the end of the 2nd training I became aware of something. I don't know where I got this from, but I knew that all I had to do, and this is a really big point for anyone that's ever in a situation where you might ever get exposed to anything that might be a cult, it's really simple. What you have to learn to do is to learn to have a clear no which brooks no argument. And at the end of the 2nd training I gave them my clear no which brooked no argument, and they just backed off, and that was it. Except, to be honest, over a period of weeks there were the phone calls to see if I could be persuaded to change my mind, and all I did was just to keep giving my clear no. And then I didn't say anything more about them. But I'm going to go back to the second cult because this is a particularly disturbing one. So what I want to share with you about this one is that the first night, the circle of green and yellow eyes, the real one, I'm a zombie, I'm just scraping paint off this door and don't even know what's going on. Oh, you're obviously going to think, so why aren't you still there, Keith? What happened? Well, I'll tell you how I got out. My wife, Cinda, could see that something had happened to me and that the lights were off and no one was at home. So she realised that, and she realised she'd have to move fast. So she packed our rucksacks, she organised everything, she crept out of the building, went to the local bus stop, find out what time the next bus was, and then got everything organised, and the sense of timing was very precise because she kept herself out of their way so no one was kind of aware of what she was doing. And then just at the right time she went to see me, got hold of my hand, put the scraper down and put the sandpaper down, and I just walked out with her. I would have walked out with anyone at that point because they were in a state of blind obedience. And we crossed the road and we were there for maybe 30 seconds and the bus turned up and I got onto the bus. Now, you would have thought that had been the end of it, but it wasn't. This did shock me because this is the days before the internet. It didn't exist in those days. There was no internet, right? Somehow they managed to find out my address, but this is complicated because that wouldn't have been any use to them because my address was in Holland at that time, right? But what happened to me is as follows. Because we were visiting England, went visiting these communities, went back to Holland. I have to give you this bit of the detail because I don't want to, so I will. What happened after that was we then went back to Holland and started to live our life, so we thought. But what happened is every weekend, around about Friday early evening time, now this doesn't come from me, this comes from Cinda. All I can do is to take on trust what she's telling me. I underwent a total personality change and I became like an angry monster, and that lasted for 2 days, and by Sunday evening it was like a switch was flipped and I became normal again. And this went on every weekend for 6 months, and it was very distressing because she told me I did this and I had no memory of anything that happened. So as far as I was concerned, she might have been making it all up. The only evidence to support her claim was the fact that she was in such a state by the Sunday evening. And I had to think, well, this is really strange. So I went to see a number of healers, and eventually I found one that was able to do good work, sufficient to deal with cult. Because if you've been exposed to a cult, normal healing methods are not going to work. So this is a person in Norfolk, in England, and I went along and he was a hypnotherapist, and told him what had been done to me and how it was affecting my life. And he says, well, I don't normally deal with people like you. I don't want to, because I'm a therapist, and basically what I do, I can work until 9 o'clock at night and this is fine. But if I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you, and then I'm not going to be able to work for 3 days, and I'm going to be completely exhausted when I'm finished, and I'm not going to charge you any money. That's the deal. To which I go, huh? Don't know what the guy's talking about. And he takes me through a process, and basically it stops, and I don't become like a monster every weekend. It finishes. So that was total success. And at this point we're both thinking, well, we're done. No. Go to visit my parents. Now, there's no way they'd have my parents' address, right? Because they wouldn't. If they ever would have had an address, it would have been my address in Holland with my wife, but no. So I'm staying with my parents, and they've gone away looking after the cats. There's a knock on the door at about 11 o'clock one morning. A woman, a member of this cult, is standing outside the door. Can you imagine how I felt? Have you any idea what it would feel like? I've been through all this, we've been through all this, and we're free. Maybe I'm not. maybe we're not. I was absolutely terrified. And this is what happened to me last night. I'm reading this book about Ruslana jumping off a building because she couldn't cope, because what they did to her was so severe. And I'm plunged into memory of what happened to me when I was 10. I don't really remember any of it. Then what happened to me when I was 27, which I certainly remember quite a lot about, because I've actually been able to talk to you about all this stuff. Isn't it interesting? I can remember all this, but this is the bit. There's a particular point when the two cult leaders take me into the room to have a chat privately. I have no idea what went on. I don't know what was said. I don't know what I agreed to. I don't know anything. But I remember their eyes. Very, very disturbing eyes. So that woman was standing outside. Well, I don't know how we got rid of her, but we did. And that was the last really experience of that organisation. I don't know what it was. Maybe she realised they put all this effort in. So reading between the lines, learning about black magic, they used black magic to turn me into a zombie on the first night. They used black magic every weekend, getting together as a group, sending their dodgy vibes out to see if they could get me back. It didn't work. Personal visit to a place they should have not had any idea of the whereabouts of. Last attempt to get me back, then done. Yeah, so disturbing stuff. Now here's the thing. It goes on. People who have these experiences, we've spoken about Ruslana and experience in this cult, we then get to hear about other women, other models that went into the cult, and then the guy, the investigative journalist, gets a friend to actually infiltrate, and this is a young man the right age, and he goes through the whole thing. And after the first day and evening of being in there, they've got all these psychologists ready to help him because they know he's actually being programmed, brainwashed, mind control. That's the word I'm looking for. He's being mind controlled. They know that, and so it's agreed. They help him, but he goes back and he completes the first course. But at the end of the first course, he's so desperate to sign up for more. He's so desperate to sign up for more. And here's a really disturbing thing. He then goes for a period of many months where he is completely screwed up. And it's rather like someone who's been subjected to a really nasty drug, only worse. And it completely throws him out, and he has to have a lot of help, a lot of psychiatric intervention. And it takes him many months to get straight. And he went in there just to be a mole, you know. He never wanted to have anything to do with this. So this is why this imprint vulnerability stuff is so serious. Last night I felt the fear. I felt the fear, the absolute terror. And I realised what my core fear is. My core fear is not what other people can do to me. That's not it. My core fear is if I get taken by those that now to do this manipulation, what I will be made to do to somebody else. Because I know blind obedience is what I was mind controlled into. And so last night, when I climbed into bed, I was in a state of terror and fear of what I could do to another. And that's the fear I always carry with me, and that's what I've never spoken about, because I'm terrified that if I get into the wrong hands, the right buttons can be pushed and I can be a monster, because that's what I've been. That's the end of part 1.